see you have entered my humble abode without my permission. Prepare to die by the end of my sword, villain! This is what sword fighting was back in the old times. It was much more theater back then. People just taking out swords and just, you know, thrusting them at each other, slowly inching towards each other until somebody eventually got, you know, that's how sword fighting was. That's factual information. Look in any history book. It's right there. Okay, so, here's a question. What's this character's name? It's Zorro, right? Yeah, well, yeah, it is, but is it one R or two? Or is it spelled Zolo instead? Because according to Viz Media, and according to the English releases there, it's Zolo with an L, and as we all remember, the voice of a generation, probably the best song of the 21st century, as this old, serenade goes, his name's Zolo, he's just like a samurai, and an LAD, why Nami's not shy, Usopp's doing that marksman thing, and Sanji's cooking for the would-be king. I'm not gonna do the whole song, but maybe at the end, okay. So, yeah, now listen, there's two reasons for this. Sometimes it might be because of genuine mistranslation, alright? We can't exactly rule that out, because in the Japanese hiragana, there really isn't a, like, L sound, like a la sound, okay? It's ra instead. L's and R's are phonetically very similar, you know, in Japanese. So that's like one legitimate reason why some people might confuse the R to L.
Wait, your name is ZORO Zorro?
Yeah, dude, my parents hated me! Shucks to be you!
But more common what the reason is copyright, especially when you're bringing it over here to the States. Because Zorro is a trademark character, okay, that appeared long before Oda was even born, okay? Probably before Oda's parents were probably ever born. And so in Japan that's fine, but much like the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure route with the different stand names when they're, you know, sent all over the world and things, like, okay, we gotta start changing some of these names, alright? So we don't want to get sued, right? So that's the reason why in Viz it's you know, written as Zolo rather than Zorro, okay, for copyright reasons there. So that got me curious, though. I was aware of the character Zorro that was created by Johnston McCulley back in the day. This was actually created back in 1919, so we're talking a long freaking time ago that this character was around. I have never read any of the books, though, or watched any of the movies that feature Zorro. Literally, the best thing I had to go off of was an old episode of The Simpsons in season 11 where the Simpsons go to see a movie called The Poke of Zorro, and that movie was deliberately like a really like hyperbolic version of Zorro, and he was like trying to save the King of England or something, and it was so ridiculous. There was even a scene in the episode where, you know, Bart is like, oh, there are ninjas coming at Zorro now, this is so historically accurate, and Lisa's like, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with anything. And I think there was a rap song in there somewhere, but that was literally all I was exposed to involving Zorro. Beyond that, I knew he was like the swashbuckling hero. You know, he wore the mask, he had the fancy hat, he rode a black horse, and he used not a katana as a weapon, he did use a sword, he used a rapier most of the time. And his trademark would always be taking that rapier and marking his defeated foes or objects with the Z to, you know, as his calling card, like Zorro was here this day. So I actually did a little bit of research, because I was actually kind of curious. I'm like, okay, considering this is Zorro's namesake, and considering there's so many issues with his name because of him, I wanted to learn a little bit more about the characters. So I went up and I checked out, you know, the author, Johnston McCulley, who's invented Zorro. He also invented a bunch of other characters that are still kind of used today. There was a movie starring Antonio Banderas back in the late 90s, and Anthony Hopkins as well. He was in it as well. I never saw that movie, although I probably should at this point. Zorro is pretty cool. How cool is Zorro? He is essentially the precursor to Batman. I'm not even kidding. That's basically what I got from reading it. Okay, so get this. Zorro is the son of this rich family from California. This was back in the late 1700s and the late 1800s when there was still a lot of Spanish, colonies in California on the western side of the United States. You know, still a lot of, Spanish-Mexican population there because it wasn't really, divided quite yet exactly. California was a state at this point, but it's just there was a lot of people that hadn't, it's like, well, it's America now, so you know, go ahead. I'm like, no, we're staying here because we were here, So there was that awkward time there. And Zorro, he went overseas and he learned swordplay, and then his mother died at one point, and he returned back to the States, and he was basically like the crusader, defending the downtrodden and all that kind of stuff. And also, on top of that, he lived in a nice little, like, ranch house with his father, and underneath that house was a series of, like, tunnels and different, like, hidden rooms, and he also kept his trusty steed, Tornado, which was this black stallion he would ride around on. So, let's see. He's a character that defends the downtrodden. He has a dead mother. He has a secret, Zorro cave underneath his nice house. He's rather wealthy. He learned all these extra, like, martial arts and, like, swordsmanship. Yeah, it seems kind of familiar to a certain character I think we're all familiar with. Batman did not appear until 1939 in Detective Comics. That was the first time that Batman appeared. So it's hard not to look at Zorro with all those similarities and see, like, there wasn't some, inspiration taken from that and thrown into Batman, right? Now, Zorro himself, though, might have also been based off of another character that appeared even before Johnston McCauley created him. So Johnston McCauley created Zorro in 1919. He first appeared in, like, a magazine article. Not really an article, like a short story. See, listen, I have to explain this. Back in the day, there wasn't smartphones or Facebook or the internet even. I know, it's crazy, right, to think of a world like that. So, how to pass the time? Well, they had to read. Now, of course, there were books back then, but they also had things called, magazines. Yeah, they had these things called magazines, right? And so a lot of these magazines would feature, like, nothing but short stories, just like a compendium of short stories by various authors, and you would read them and you would be entertained. And Zorro was in one of those magazines called the All Story Weekly. So that's how it worked, and the character just kind of took off, and there were other stories made after that. Johnston McCauley continued the Zorro character for quite a long time. The last Zorro story penned by him was released in 1959, and the reason that that's pertinent is because Johnston McCauley himself died 1 year previously in 1958. So, he was really into this character. He was writing stories even after he died. That was it's like, I need to get the last story out. My soul is resurrected just to finish my magnum opus. But no, it was obviously written by him beforehand and then released later, but still, it was a lot of stuff involving the character, right? But no, the character that existed before even Zorro was a French character in 1905 by the name of the Scarlet Pimpernel. And ooh, I get to talk about France now! Ah, crap, I just realized I don't know anything about France. Croissants? Normandy, D-Day, although that's not a great way to start talking about France. But no. So there's a character named the Scarlet Pimpernel who, kind of in the same vein as Zorro, dressed up, kind of a defender. Although, in the case of the Scarlet Pimpernel, he would defend the aristocracy against, like, being executed or captured. That's what the Scarlet Pimpernel was about. Also, have you ever seen the movie Tenacious D in the Pick of Destiny? At the end, when they're having that awesome rock-off with the devil does name-drop the Scarlet Pimpernel at one point. So take that whatever you will. And also, in that Simpson episode I previously mentioned, there is also a reference to the Scarlet Pimpernel. So, there's close ties there between the two characters. But I'm gonna say Zorro is cooler, just because, dresses in all black, uses a sword, although he's not averse to using guns. He'll straight up bust out a gun, too. So, yeah, I don't think we're ever gonna get that with Zorro in One Piece, where Zorro's fighting against somebody with three-sword style, and he's like, screw this. Probably not. In fact, Zorro doesn't need to, because he has his pound the hole techniques, which are even better than guns. Actually more like cannon fire, essentially, for Zorro. So, I don't know. That might have just been a natural evolution of Zorro's abilities, like Oda arrived to the point in the story where he's like, alright, Zorro uses swords. He's gonna have to start getting some sort of long-range attack. I'm gonna have to write something in, because otherwise Zorro is stuck at close-range combat forever. So, it might have been because of that just natural, like, that necessity that Zorro has to have a long-range attack. Or, I don't know, maybe Oda was watching some old Zorro films back in, like, the 30s or 40s, and he saw Zorro just whip out a revolver, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna make Zorro have a long-range attack based off that scene alone. Also, Zorro, of course, does not ride around on a trusty goofy black steed named Tornado, but he does have that awesome technique, you know, Sun Toryu 3-sword style, like Dragon Twister, and I think after the time skip it was like the Black Rope Dragon Twister, and it like creates this whirlwind that just continues on, and it will chase you until the depths of hell, you know? So that was a pretty cool ability. That might have been referenced, and hey, it's after the time skip, it's the Black Rope Dragon Twister, and I believe Black Rope, that's another reference to something Japanese, but it does sort of tie back to the horse, so okay, fine, right? Now, aside from the stuff like that, there's really not a lot of, like, overt references between Zorro and Zorro. You know, originally, I honestly thought Zorro, before doing my research today, I thought Zorro originated in Mexico or Spain. Like, that's the origin of the character. But no, I find out, no, it was written by an American in the early 20th century, but it was based off, you know, in the 1800s during the time when there was a lot more Spanish living in California. So that's the origins of the character, but there's not really a lot of Spanish or, like, Mexican references when it comes to Zorro. A lot of things that Zorro is based on are more, like, traditional Japanese, like, teachings, like the Buddhism stuff, and then also there's some stuff from Hinduism, like Ashura and everything. The fact that his, you know, Pound-ho techniques are 36, 72, 108, those are all really important numbers in Buddhist teachings. So that's where a lot of the references come from Zorro, but he does have the one main reference I think everyone is aware of that ties him closely to Zorro, not just the fact that he uses swords and everything. Of course, once again, Zorro used rapiers, not katanas, but still, swords are swords, right? He also has, though, his bandana. That's the thing that everybody was going to reference immediately. The fact that whenever Zorro gets serious, he takes his black bandana, which is more green in the anime, but he takes off his black bandana and wraps it around his head, and that's, you know, when things are about to get real, okay? Wait, I got it. I don't think it's long enough for my head, but, you know, I literally just took a piece of sheet and then, you know, like for your bed, and I cut off part of it, and boom, instant Zorro headband. There we go. Yeah, things are about to get serious now. But no, that's the main reference I think that Oda took. Yeah, I just wanted to make a video about it, you know, drawing the similarities. You know, maybe at one point I'll go and watch one of the movies. Obviously, there's a lot of black and white movies back in the day. The Zorro character really took off during the era of, like, silent films and then eventually the talkies. So there's a lot of films involving the Zorro character throughout that time period. And then there was a moment where, of course, it kind of dulled. People lost interest. There was the movie in 1998 starring Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas that came out, The Mask of Zorro. So if you're going to watch anything Zorro related, it would probably be that movie, honestly, or you could watch the Simpson episode for a really bad reference. Actually, there's probably one of the funniest jokes in The Simpsons that I love, and I remember watching this when I was a kid. I'm a big Simpson nut, in case you didn't know. In that episode, after they're done seeing the movie, you know, Homer thinks, like, oh, I'm just going to take a glove and challenge everybody to duels like Zorro did, and that's how he gets out of everything. Like, somebody cuts him off in traffic. He's like, I'll slap you with this glove and you'll have to duel me. He's like, oh, okay, fine, you could go. You know, eventually, Homer slaps this, like, Southern colonel in the face, and he's like, oh, sir, well, I will duel you, pistols at dawn. And Homer's like, ah, crap, what would Zorro do in this situation? And he pictures Zorro, and he's, like, taking out his sword, like, ha-ha! And the colonel just takes out his gun and just shoots him point blank, and Homer's like, no, Zorro, why? So that was a pretty funny reference there. But hey, when it comes to Zorro, guns aren't gonna work. Especially where Zorro's at right now, because someone could take out, like, an automatic gun or whatever and just start to, like, blow Zorro away, and he would just take out his swords. He only needs one. He just takes out one sword and just, like, okay, and either the bullets would be cut or, like, bounced off his blade, and there would be no damage to him whatsoever. So Zorro doesn't have to worry about that exactly. So if you're in a duel with him, you better hope it involves Yu-Gi-Oh cards, because otherwise you're pretty much screwed. One last thing I felt like I should mention is the name Zorro. Like, what does that actually mean in Spanish? And it means fox. So I was like, okay, now it makes sense in the context of the old stories, because Zorro, in the old stories, he wasn't quite as, like, bloodthirsty as Zorro is in One Piece. You know, Zorro will be one of the first people to charge into a battle and be like, yeah, I want to taste the blood. You know, something like that. Zorro, back in the day, wasn't really into that sort of thing. He was much more of a swashbuckler, much more elegant, that sort of things. And the fact that his name is Fox, and the fact that he would always be eluding the constable or the police or whoever was back then, and, you know, he would be outwitting them constantly. He's a trickster, sort of thing. That was, you know, where the name comes from. Now, in Zorro's case, there's a lot of animals you could have references to Zorro. You could do tigers, you could do dragons, you could even do gorillas. He has those each gorilla, knee gorilla techniques. Or you could just do a straight up, like, Kishin, or demon, or devil. That's also appears a lot in Zorro. But Fox, in terms of, like, outmaneuvering your opponent, like, tricking them and everything, and making a clean getaway, like, aha! I fooled you! I will return another day to take your head! You know, that's not really Zorro. That's not really Roronoa, right? Also, think about Mihaawk. You know, now Mihaawk more also, I think... See, I don't know, I can't tell with Mihaawk, you know, because the 4Kids dub messed me up for life. They gave him, like, a French accent. So now I'm looking at Mihaawk, and I'm thinking... I'm sort of getting references from, like, French noblemen, but also I could see, like, Spanish conquistador kind of thing with Mihaawk. So, I don't exactly know how you view that, but he also, Oda might have been taking references to Zorro and like, okay, I'm going to give Zorro Roronoa his name based on that, but in terms of aesthetic and being more of an elegant kind of swashbuckler, I'm going to give that to Mihaawk instead. Granted, Zorro didn't go around carrying a giant sword, but that was mostly just for practicality, right? The rapier is just easier to handle, and you know, you don't have to worry about, like, when you're filming a movie or something, you don't have to make this custom giant sword, so makes sense in that context, right? But yeah, I'm thinking maybe Oda was a fan of the older movies, and that's how he incorporated it into his characters between Mihaawk and Zorro, yeah. But, yeah, if you ever wanted to know the history of the character, that's the basic gist of it anyway. You should probably go and watch maybe some other videos about the subject matter, because, like I said, I'm not an expert on this, but I thought it would be cool to, like, present some of the past, you know, and everything. Like, oh, this is the character that Zorro is based on. That would be pretty neat. So... I've done that, and maybe I'll look back to see maybe some other historical figures, or maybe, no, they don't have to necessarily be real, they could be fictional, like Zorro was, because he never existed. Kind of like a Robin Hood kind of character, right? So maybe I'll look around to see if some other historical, fictional characters were based off One Piece characters. Maybe I'll do some other videos on them. But for right now, I think it's time I take my leave. Oh, crap, my sword got stuck on my cape. Bye, everybody!